Well, California's really been a leader in the field of environmental literacy for about 40 years now. And about 20 years ago now, under the leadership of then Assembly Member Fran Pavley and with the support of then State Senator Tom Torlakson, who eventually became the state superintendent, there was a piece of legislation passed called the Education and the Environment Initiative. And that legislation was really critical because it set the groundwork that we're still using now. And the first step in that whole process was the development of a series of environmental principles and concepts. Really think of those as the big ideas about the environment that we want every student to know and be able to use as they go about their daily lives, not just in school, of course, but when they become adults, because they're really going to be the critical decision makers. So we were looking at ideas that would give students all the perspective on the connections between human societies and human cultures and human social systems and the Earth's natural systems. So ecosystems, of course, in a general term, but really all of the living parts of Earth. And so back in 2004, after that law was passed, we developed a series of environmental principles and concepts. And I think it was very important because to get a policy to be effective like this, you need to bring in all of the stakeholders. And we ran a number of focus groups and meetings with technical experts from around the state representing the education system, non-formal educators, universities, environmental agencies like the California Environmental Protection Agency and the Natural Resources Agency, as well as the State Department of Education and the State Board of Education. So with all of those agencies involved, we developed these draft environmental principles and concepts, which we then took out to focus groups around the state. We developed those environmental principles and concepts back in 2004 and brought in 6 state agencies to cooperate to develop those, as well as all the universities, the non-formal institutions, and non-governmental institutions who represented citizens' interest in the environment. And we brought them together over the course of a year to discuss the key elements of environmental knowledge that they all thought students needed to have if they were going to graduate from high school. And really, they're applicable in college and as adults as well. They're not just aimed at students, but they were designed for that. So we ended up with 5 environmental principles and concepts, and it's those environmental principles and concepts that have then driven all of the subsequent work. The first thing that was done after we had the principles and concepts was to develop a curriculum that was a model curriculum for the state of California. And we developed materials, really probably the biggest environmental literacy curriculum that's ever been developed. It was developed, there were 85 units that we created, covering science and history, social science. Really, the point was to help teachers help students see the connections so that the environment isn't just out there someplace. It's not just about the wilds. It's about the places where students live, their communities, and the things they depend on: clean air, clean water, healthy soil, all of those aspects of the environment that students depend on. So that Education and the Environment Initiative was the keystone for all of the work since. That happened back in 2004. And then in 2010, we completed the Education and the Environment Initiative curriculum, which was approved by the State Board of Ed. And that was really a gigantic breakthrough because it was really the first environmental curriculum that had ever been adopted by the state of California in a formal way. And when the State Board of Education approved that, they literally said, this can be used to substitute for the more standardized texts we have in science and history social science. So already in 2005, 2006, 2007, 8, 9, and 10, the State Board of Ed had become so invested in this and the importance of this that they wanted every student in the state to get exposed to this. That things like that don't happen instantly, of course, but we've kept going ever since then. That curriculum was disseminated to literally tens of thousands of teachers, and millions of students' lessons have gone out. So that was really the first gigantic breakthrough between 2004 and 2011. Then in 2013, the state board adopted a new set of science standards called the Next Generation Science Standards. They had already adopted the Common Core in math and English language arts. And so when they adopt new standards, it creates an opportunity for them to create what they call a curriculum framework. And this is something that's very important to teachers and to administrators and the school system as a whole, really, because curriculum frameworks guide the teachers in the way the state wants those standards taught. And so in that case, for example, with science, they were saying, we want you to tie these environmental principles and concepts directly in with science instruction. And we want students to be learning about the environment and learning about science in the context of the environment. So that was a gigantic shift that really hasn't ever happened in any other state like that. And then, so we started working on the curriculum frameworks in science first, and then history, social science, and then health education, and then visual and performing arts. And currently, we're working on the math curriculum framework. So each of those pieces becomes deeper and deeper guidance to teachers and to principals and to school and district and county office of education administrators as to how the State Board of Education wants them to implement standards. So it's the key guidance, and it's guidance to teachers and it's guidance to publishers as well. And that's another important aspect of this that's occurred in the last 6 years now. We've gone from a point where publishers weren't responsible for doing anything about the environment or environmental literacy to the point where now they have specific guidance and instruction from the State Board of Education that in their published materials that they submit for approval and for use by school districts, they are required to incorporate environmental literacy, specifically in the environmental principles and concepts, so that students are learning those as they learn the standards. And so we've got those environmental principles and concepts built into the guidelines for instructional materials in all of those disciplines: science, history, social science, visual and performing arts, health, and now we're working on math. And so it really is an opportunity that nobody's ever seen anywhere really in the states before, which is to give all students an opportunity to experience the environment and learn about the environment. And it's, as I said, it's not just about nature out there, it's about their local community, how environmental health can affect them. So for example, in the health framework, specifically talks about environmental justice and environmental health and how students can make those connections so that what they're learning about in their environmental literacy experiences are really directly applicable to their communities and will be useful to them as they become decision makers and adults in their own communities.